We begin our story with the 63rd session of the Texas Legislature, January 1973. The issue of restructuring the state system of funding schools was by no means new. In December of 1971, a three-judge federal court had already agreed on one word to describe the system of school financing. That word, unconstitutional. The state of Texas had appealed the ruling to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the 63rd legislative session had convened while the matter was under consideration. The High Court ruling finally came in March of '73, with less than a month remaining in the legislative session. The Supreme Court had overturned the lower court decision, and while they had concluded that there were major inequities in the finance system, they washed their hands of the entire controversy. They ruled that education was a function of the state, and the matter was entirely out of their jurisdiction. Between the Supreme Court ruling and the end of the 63rd session, 6 bills for restructuring the school finance system were introduced. 2 of them got close to approval, but not close enough.
I don't think the 63rd legislature was ready to tackle the controversial problem of public school finance. The House of Representatives took the necessary steps and passed a complete reform bill in House Bill 946, trying to restructure the public school financing system in Texas. However, we ran into difficulty in the other 2 chambers, and as a result, we didn't get the thing solved.
What kind of difficulty did you run into?
Well, number one, we had opposition from the governor, who did not believe that this was the best solution. The senators, on the other hand, accepted that.
After Kubiak's bill passed the House and went over to the Senate bill was substituted for the Kubiak bill. It came back to the House. We were not able to accept it. It went into a conference committee.
We were speaking in terms of putting in $97 million the first 2 years, $200 million the next 2 years, and then bringing up the level of spending from the current $3 per child per day to $5 per child per day. And they weren't ready to accept that, and as a result, that plan was defeated.
And the governor's plan substituted?
The governor's plan substituted was nothing more than a $40 million grant to the 1,117 districts in the state of Texas, and that was a one-shot deal with a study committee on it. We opposed it because we said that this measure had been studied to death.
I don't know whether or not you might recall that the vote was 70-70 there on the last day of the session, and we were trying desperately to remedy the situation, to respond to the needs of some of the schools that were real financially distraught. We were not able to do so. The bill died.
The Speaker refused to vote on that measure because of the fact that we had passed a complete revision, a complete overhaul, and had gone through several days of very hard and controversial debate on the floor itself. And when this small item came back, they just refused to accept that in lieu of what we had already done.
And so the 63rd session of the Texas Legislature ended, and despite a mandate by the Supreme Court to change its system of funding schools, it could not agree on a new method. The legislature had ordered schools to provide free kindergarten to all 5-year-old children. It also ordered several other programs, but it provided no new money to support these programs, and school districts across the state had to tighten up their budgets in order to make ends meet. What those school districts had to do in order to stay afloat is the subject of the next part of our series. Maclovio Perez for Big News on the Scene. Insofar as public schools, the last session of the Texas Legislature ordered school districts to provide free kindergarten for all 5-year-old children. It ordered schools to provide workman's compensation, it ordered schools to purchase liability insurance, and it ordered several other measures. Most of these new programs were beneficial for the most part, but the legislature provided no added money to support these programs, and with these added demands intermingled with the present rate of inflation, school districts across the state were forced to streamline operations. In order to streamline operations, school districts didn't have many alternatives.
The 700 school districts raised local taxes. They also, in some cases, cut out some programs or failed to pass on teacher raises that came in from the state this year, and things of this nature in order to economize at the local school district level. So it was, they had three choices. They could raise taxes locally, they could cut back on their programs, or they could cut back on salaries. One of the three had to be done.
Presently, the school districts across the state raise 48% of the total cost of education. 52% is paid for by the state and federal government. Because we did not pass a school bill last time, many of your property owners throughout the state of Texas had tax increases in order for the local districts to meet their budgets. Had we passed 946, there would have been no tax increases, and in essence would have made the state provide a greater portion of the cost of education for the school children in the state of Texas.
How much has San Antonio School District's tax base gone up in the past year?
Actually, it's gone up 14 cents in total. There are two taxes. One is the maintenance and operation, and the other is debt service. From last year to the current school year, the increased values permitted us to drop the debt service by 2 cents, which was increased actually the operating cost by 16 cents.
As tax increases go, is last year's increase substantial?
Yes, I think it was. I think this has been true of all schools that had any ability to raise their taxes, because the rate of inflation along with the increased salary structure has required this kind of increase.
So while taxes rose for nearly everybody, some school districts were overtaxing and raising the needed monies. But other school districts were overtaxing and still not making it. The difference depended on the amount of wealth located within a particular school district. The more wealth you have, the more tax money you can derive from it. Our infamous ad valorem tax is largely at the bottom of this. It is the ad valorem tax that determines how much money can be raised for schools. On tomorrow's segment of this series, we'll discuss the ad valorem tax and the inequities it creates. We'll also discuss another financial puzzle, this one called the economic index. Maclovio Perez for Big News on the Scene. The ad valorem tax is considered by many to be the crux of our present problem. This tax seems to widen the already existing financial gap between poor districts and rich districts. For example, in the Alamo Heights School District, after all the property is assessed and divided among the number of pupils, there is roughly $40,000 of taxable wealth per student. Across town, the Edgewood School District has only $4,300 of taxable wealth per student. This large gap exists just within San Antonio. Statewide, the gap turns into a canyon. There are 21 school districts in Texas that have over $1 million of taxable wealth per student.
In my opinion, an ad valorem tax system is no longer a true measure of wealth, and it is not capable any longer of supporting 50% of the cost of a state school system. I think that an additional portion of this burden must be shifted to a broad-based tax at the state level if we are to meet the demands that are being made on public schools today.
There is another formula that makes equitable funding of schools a difficult task. It is the formula that determines how much money a county must contribute for schools within its boundaries. The formula is called the economic index, and it has been criticized almost since its creation.
The economic index presently takes the real estate values of a county, multiplies them by 20. All right, that's 20% of the formula. Now, that 20% is off because the actual values in the state vary from 5% of what the true values are to 80% of what the true values are. So the formula is already out of kilter right there. The second part of that formula takes the number of pupils in a given county and multiplies them by 8. And I don't know why that was ever placed into the formula. And then the last part of the formula takes your mining, minerals, manufacturing, and payrolls and multiplies that by 72%. And that gives you the 100% formula that we currently use to distribute the funds of the state to the local district. Well, the formula itself encourages a local district to cheat, because the better the job that they do, and those that are getting 80% of true market value are doing a good job, they are penalizing their districts and are getting less money from the state. Those that are getting that 5% true evaluation are in essence getting more money from the state, and you in essence are encouraging these people to cheat. And that's why the economic index is totally out of proportion. It is the one single element that no one has really attacked in trying to come up with a true value.
In regards to the need to equalize assessment ratios, something has been done. Attorney General John Hill recently issued an opinion in response to a query by the Commissioner of Education. The opinion stated that the Commissioner should require counties to report the percentage of true market value at which they assess property. That is to say that assessors may continue to tabulate property values at less than full market value, but at what percentage must be reported to the Commissioner. This should help the Commissioner equalize taxing efforts by local districts according to their tax-paying abilities. We've established that our school system has major faults, and on tomorrow's part of this series, we'll discuss what steps would be needed to correct the inequities that exist in our school system. Maclovio Perez for Big News on the Scene. Through the course of the last few years, countless groups have drafted resolutions, suggestions, and plans, all aimed at changing our system of school financing. The Texas legislature heard proposals and counter-proposals in the last 3 sessions, but still there has been no change. We're still using the same system that was drafted in 1949. The 64th session of the legislature will also consider restructuring when they convene in January. They will hear maybe 5 or 6 different plans. One plan to be considered comes from the Governor's Office for Educational Research and Planning. Their system is entitled the Weighted Pupil Approach.
Very simply, what it does, it makes the pupil and his learning needs the center of the funding system. Okay. It flows from a determination, an assessment of the learning needs of the individual student, and attempts to flow money precisely to the school district in an adequate amount to meet the identified learning needs of the student. What we determined was the amount of money necessary in each one of these programs to produce quality, in terms of existing better programs. We have indexed these, and we find that the cheapest program is regular elementary education. We've always robbed from the elementary school to beef up our secondary school programs, which is a mistake, which we hope we can correct through our recommendations. But that becomes 1.0 in a program index system. And everything else is a matter of figuring out how many times that level of spending is necessary. So like vocational agriculture, we found was one of the most expensive vocational programs, and it costs 2.63 times as much per full-time equivalent pupil as it does in regular elementary ed.
The House Education Committee, first of all, found that in all the research that 80% of all of the foundation learning that any person in the world receives takes place between the years of 2 and 10. Now that means we've got to get more help in that area, because if that's where the foundation learning takes place, it doesn't make any difference what dollars you pour into a system after he's past 10 years old, you've got to get that help in the earlier years. So we said that the number one thing was to reduce that teacher-pupil ratio, that the most important thing in that whole classroom is the teacher. So we recommended in the kindergarten that you have no more than 15 pupils per one teacher. In the first, second, and third grade, that you have no more than 1 to 20 teacher-pupil ratio. Then in the fourth, fifth, and sixth grades, it would be no more than 1 to 23. And then in your high schools, you would have a 1 to 24 teacher-pupil ratio, no more than. That, we believe, would correct that problem throughout the state, and then get the additional monies in maintenance and operation and transportation and the other viable areas of education, and we would solve the problem.
So it seems that if a new system of school financing comes out of the 64th legislature, it will be one based either on a lower teacher-pupil ratio or one based on the weighted pupil approach. But this won't be the first time that school financing has been considered at the state capitol. Matter of fact, the last 3 sessions considered the problems, but the system still was never changed. With this lack of activity in mind, the last part of this series will deal with the question, just how good are the chances for change in the next legislative session? Maclovio Perez for Big News on the Scene. Do you think it's possible at all that the 64th session will end and no reform will come about?
I don't think the people of this state would tolerate that again, because unless we do something this time, we're going to have some property tax increase as much as 100% unless we do something during this next session. And I don't believe that any legislator wants to go home and face those angry people again. And I believe that we are going to face up to it. As to what plan we'll get out, I don't know. It depends upon the leadership of the House and of the Senate. And whatever is done in those areas is going to be done with their blessing.
I think that there's a very good chance, almost a certainty, that some type of legislation is going to be passed. How reforming it is still open to question. I'd say that the chances for reform are fairly good.
Why fairly good?
Well, because I think that there was an awareness of the inequities in the system. You have many groups that have been calling for reform, and the water in the pot's about boiling, and I think that the pot's going to blow unless something is done to remedy the inequities that we find in the state.
What is the political climate for public school restructuring in the 64th legislature?
I don't think it's good, Maclovio, and the reason that I say I don't think it's good is because the leadership that apparently will prevail in the House this next session, I don't think is attuned to restructuring our public school systems in Texas. And I think that unless and until we can prevail upon that leadership to name a person like Dan Kubiak, who I consider to be the most knowledgeable legislator in the Texas House on education, to head up the new education committee, I just think that we're in a dire state. And Dan Kubiak, like myself, we're not on the Speaker's team this time.
From the way things are shaping here on Capitol Hill, it's already apparent there's going to be a power struggle, specifically in the race for Speaker of the House. Should the struggle escalate, political warfare could prevent a change for the better in our school financing system.
In our opinion, to play politics with the education of our children is indeed gambling with the future. It is a logical assumption that if the children of today receive a less than adequate education, the adults of tomorrow will not be properly prepared.
Many groups have conceded to the problems of our school system. Many groups have demanded for change, and many groups have already recommended alternatives. But only the Texas legislature has the authority and the power to enact laws changing our school system. Consequently, along with the power must come the burden and the responsibility. The 64th session of the Texas legislature convenes here this month, and in their hands lies the future of our school system, the future of our children, and the future of the state of Texas. Maclovio Perez for Big News on the Scene at the state capitol in Austin.
Shaw of 5406 Scova and Linda Colleen Bailey of 240 West Woodlawn. Both were 21 years old. Miss Bailey died at Bexar County Hospital shortly after being airlifted by a massed helicopter